Hello, welcome back to the Non-Essential Workers podcast. I am your first co-host, Alex Rashiotis.
Number 2, Aiden Galligan.
I'm Jason.
And this is a left-wing podcast covering politics, media, the news, bullshit, entertainment, all sorts of stuff. And this week, we are going to head off our news section with Aiden.
Headlines, misleading, confusing. Hopefully you've listened to enough episodes at this point to understand what we're getting at. If you don't, you will soon, because the news continues to be absurd. And the way that it's framed, even more so. So, the time of this recording, the Afghanistan, the pullout of U.S. troops from Afghanistan is extremely current. So there's going to be plenty of news about that. So I thought, why don't we start with something that's not about that, just to warm ourselves up, dip our toes into the water, realize that it's scalding unpleasant, and jump in anyways. So number 1 comes from your favorite, definitely independent newspaper, the Washington Post. And it is DeSantis.
Isn't this the one Bezos owns?
It sure is.
Who'd have thought the richest man in the world pushes the most conservative bullshit you've ever heard?
Yeah, it was really such a funny coincidence that when he was getting all that heat for going into space, there were a bunch of articles about why we need billionaires. Just the craziest coincidences happen in this world. So, number 1, DeSantis, faced with COVID surge, urges Floridians to use Regeneron antibody treatment given to Trump.
Isn't this an immediate violation of what do they call it? Like you can't hawk a private business's product as a government employee.
You're talking about like a public-private conflict of interest between us.
Conflict of interest, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yes, but I mean, you've seen America, right?
Yeah, but this is ostensibly like a felony crime, I think.
Probably.
It shows about the kind of moral consistency that DeSantis has been putting forward up to this point.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of ways we could go with this one. To me, the most absurd part of it is the idea that this is accessible to most Floridians. My understanding is that this is one of the more expensive and elaborate and kind of out there treatments available. And it strikes me as the kind of thing that almost certainly like 90% of Floridians couldn't afford out of pocket, and that's probably not covered as some sort of like weird experimental treatment by their insurance. So it's kind of like, DeSantis suggests that rich Floridians survive by using experimental treatments because no one else can use this shit. And it's almost like he only wants to use it because it was given to Trump, not because there's any like efficacy to it, because the way it's framed is like, Trump got it. He lived. It's like, well, he's not quoting a study. He's not citing like a stat that says why to use it.
Didn't he also get the normal vaccine?
Well, it was too late because he already had the vaccine doesn't do anything when you've already caught COVID.
But I thought he did. Wait, no, has he? I don't know. Was it Biden?
No,
I don't know.
Trump didn't have even time to get the vaccine because it didn't even exist by the time he got COVID because he was fucking going out and shaking hands and pressing the flesh during the height of the pandemic. Regardless, yeah.
If he's gotten it at this point, probably
seems likely. Yeah. So a pretty strange assertion that like this is even a viable option to most Floridians. It's also kind of strange for a guy who basically led them into intentional mass pandemic. Like one of the worst states in the country as far as handling it is now thinks it has the moral credibility to tell anyone how to resolve this. Like this guy punted so hard on any effort to protect the state from COVID. Like he fought every effort to mask, to quarantine, to do anything about this. So for him to now be like, I have the solution. It's like, you should have spouting gibberish for this entire time. Shut the fuck up.
Here's my favorite way that the right wing frames stuff successfully. It's not mandates. It's not forces. It's not passes law. It's urges. Yeah. Because conservatives can't tolerate being told what to do. But if someone gently guides them or urges them or suggests, then maybe just, think about it. Just like, let it coast over that smooth brain of yours. I'm urging you to get it. Oh, okay, that's no problem. But you can't tell me what to do. You can't force me. I have to, of my own volition, be convinced that this insane thing is the right thing to do. That, to me, is my biggest takeaway from the sneaky language use in the article headline.
Yeah, DeSantis sends trade request meme to suggesting that you take the Regeneron antibody. Yeah.
But it's also like, at least they are admitting in the article headline, like, yes, Florida's getting absolutely fucked right now. At least it's not, DeSantis, everything nice and smiley and rosies and rainbows and butterflies and unicorns, just suggesting people take even more steps to be careful. It's like DeSantis getting his shit pushed in, decides to do something about it. Which is funny because, obviously I'm a big fan of the MMA and the UFC. And the UFC is run by Dana White, who's a psycho-conservative as well, personal friend to Trump, hates unions, does everything as he can to be a monopoly and a monopsony and exploit his workers and not consider them employees. Instead, they're contract workers. They have way fewer rights. And the funny thing about the pandemic is that economically, it's hurt a whole different swath of people. But some states are actually doing okay during the pandemic. And it's all the conservative states that have stayed open and allowed businesses to exploit them and their workers. So, for example, the UFC has gone to Florida like a dozen times since the pandemic opened. And DeSantis and the state's coffers are rolling in money because idiots keep going to these shows, filling up the crowds, and paying to show up, and the prices are exorbitant. So sports that are basically in these like red states get to go there. People get to go. They get to feel like things are normal, and they're spending a lot of money. So there's actually a fucked up like financial incentive for conservative states to remain doing conservative things because they will get business out of it. It's like every commercial you see where it's like, come to Ohio. We've gotten rid of corporate taxes. Please come to Ohio. We're so impoverished. We need your business. And all the people that were slobbering all over Bezos' dick to get a new Amazon headquarters in their town or their state or their city. They're like, please, we promise we won't tax you anything at all. Please just come to our city. Like it's the way that the roles are totally reversed what they're supposed to be. The governments of states and cities and towns are begging and pleading to private businesses, please come save our economy. Please come help us. Please come to us and stimulate our economy. Not the other way around, which is like, please, can we operate inside your city?
This is a very common phenomenon where essentially everyone is doing what the citations guys call a race to the bottom, as opposed to Bill Gates framing as a race to the top. Which is basically, like every state is basically saying we will straight ourselves more and fuck over our actual citizens more if it'll help us, help you fleece the country and give us a tiny cut. It is really disgusting, but this is already a microcosm of what the entire world is, which is like how you outsource jobs to the cheapest labor pool. You dodge any kind of regulations by basing your company in whatever country has the lowest taxes or non-existent taxes or havens. You basically use every loophole in the fact that there is a multiplicity of laws and regulations across the world and within the United States to just not do what you need to do. And this is the ultimate consequence of having a weak federal government, or at the very least, a federal government that's not willing to exercise its strength.
Feckless federal government.
Right. A self-abandoned federal government, basically, and a federal government doesn't give a fuck. The federalist premise doesn't really work when the states are given powers they're not even supposed to have because the federal government doesn't care. And then they just let them do it, and that means that you've got idiots who are like, we're going to give our entire state COVID. It's like, well, that's fine if you're going to quarantine the entire state and don't care about anyone in that state.
Yeah, and if all the surrounding states are barring you from entry.
Right, like if there was a gigantic border wall on like the Florida Panhandle.
That'd be so sick.
Yeah,
a border wall blocking Florida from the rest of the country.
Like we do like the Bugs Bunny saw it off of the United States and it just becomes like a fucking island in the Atlantic, sure. But it's not. It's part of the continental of the United States. So the other fucking 47 states are going to be pretty heavily affected if one shithead state says we're going to let everyone get COVID and then let them travel. So,
not even a shithead state, but a state run by shitheads.
Oh, well, right.
Obviously, as you know, anyone listening should not be so dull as to not understand. Obviously, there are millions and millions and millions of people in Florida who everyone deserves life, dignity, happiness, the pursuit of what their dreams are, and not to die from a horrible disease that we are fucking up.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant by saying, and if you don't care about anyone in the state, of course most people in Florida aren't responsible for this. Most people in Florida don't even understand what's going on, because this is high-level public policy decisions made by weird assholes and shadowy fucking organizations they don't understand, and by horrible dipshit governors like this guy. So, yeah, I mean, even if it was considered somehow ethical to let a single state fall to chaos, essentially, no, it's going to affect the entire country because that's the nature of them all being interconnected.
I'm waiting for the Wyoming sheep variant.
Yeah. And anyone who says, okay, we can handle this on a state-by-state level is basically just saying we're not going to handle this. Because that's what that means. It means it's not being handled, because that means any of them can sink the whole ship. So I mean, this is even besides the fact that once again we are suggesting a form of policy which, as you alluded to, Jace, is like offering incentives or like recommendations rather than mandates. It's offering advice column kind of shit.
Think about all the lottery things that states have come up with to try and convince their idiot, public to get the vaccine.
Yeah, and it even uses the language of like pharmaceutical companies, which is like, ask your doctor if Regeneron is right for you.
Exactly.
That's nothing. That's nothing. In hardly any other countries, especially wealthy, successful first world countries, in hardly any of them does anyone say to their doctor, I'm going to tell you what I should take. No, the doctor tells you what fits your situation the best. That's why they're the doctor. That's why they're credentialed. That's why you go to them instead of just going to the pharmacy and saying, give me that one. And only in America do we have the fucking hubris to go to a doctor and be like, I think I know your business. Why don't I tell you about?
Well, that's American expertise. The biggest thing in America is everyone thinks they know better than everyone else.
Yeah.
I know your industry better than you. I know your expertise better than you. I know your politics better than you. I know your rights better than you. That's America's number one export, is being nosy and thinking we're smarter than each other.
Yeah. I mean, and it's, that's DeSantis's whole thing. It's all the Republican governors thing, and it's some of the fucking Democratic governors thing. Honestly, is just we know better than the federal government. We know better than the CDC. We know better than pretty much every scientist and specialist on this topic in the world. We're not going to make you do masks. We're not going to make you take a vaccine. We're not going to make you do any of the things that would save hundreds of thousands of lives and millions of lifelong illnesses, because freedom means doing dumb things. Apparently, I don't know.
Free to die and eat shit.
Yeah.
Well, and also because it's not our fault, as this next article explains. Should President Xi Jinping pay the bill for global damage? Of course, referring to COVID. So, I mean, yeah, this is one of the few COVID articles, along with the previous one that I'm including this week, and it is just kind of expanding the range of this idea of just an absolute desperation to foist blame and misdirect attention elsewhere. I read a little bit because it also has a poll option. Apparently, they're inviting people to vote on this headline, whether or not the public thinks that the president of China should, I guess personally, by the way this is worded, pay for the global damage caused by COVID.
Where was this article from?
It is from a place I've never heard of called Title Press, which looks like a news aggregation site. Yeah, they source from other places. Looks like it was originally a Google News article.
Which is its own aggregator. So what the fuck is happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think
layers of aggregation.
Hey, dog, I heard you liked aggregators, so I put an aggregator.
Exactly. I think it's another good point about like people are seeing this and we can't even tell where it originally comes from. But yeah, I mean,
it came from the void.
Like the first point that I think I read in like the first half paragraph that I skimmed through was about how the suspicions that China covered up the existence of COVID for some time before it began to spread, and the news was fully out that there was an epidemic and then a pandemic, and then what we have today, which I mean we just know is false at this point. Not whether or not they covered it up, but it's false in the sense that scientists in America knew about the existence of COVID long before.
In fact, I read an article about it in November of 2019 when it was first discovered. Yep. We live in an information age where you can't hide information. It's just, can it get out quickly or slowly? Like, I was aware. I knew this shit was coming. I remember discussions with you, Alex, about like, there's this pandemic. There's a disease that's going to start spreading like SARS. We're like, yep. And we were like betting on when's America going to get it first. And then we
I didn't even think it was going to be nearly as bad, but I was at least like, hey, we should be aware of this. Like we should consider the possibilities here.
there
Like,
were literally clickbait articles like the next swine flu, the next bird flu. Like there were joke articles making fun of this new thing
because
from China
again,
in 2019.
Those diseases, while not nearly on the scale of coronavirus, still killed hundreds of thousands of people.
I'm not sure swine flu.
It did. It just wasn't in the United States. It was another.
Whatever. Only American lives matter.
But the what I really love about this title, and sort of broadly the whole kind of bizarre right wing fuck Xi Jinping and the Chinese attitude, the China virus thing, Kung Flu, all that. What I like about that is their basic assertion, as you say, is that why didn't they warn us sooner? And yet,
of their bioweapon.
And yet, every single right-wing media person, politician, etc., were the last people to believe it was real when the data was in front of them. So if they wanted us to tell them earlier, why when we told them, did they go eat shit? Fuck you, it's not real. If you want the information, you had the information, you didn't act on the information. They don't care. They never care. They don't care until like they are literally themselves in a hospital bed. So the idea that they're in any kind of good faith going like, if only Xi Jinping had called up Trump in November and was like, we have a situation, sir.
Which we don't have evidence that didn't happen.
Which it very well could have happened. Right. I mean, for fuck's sake, there was like insider trading going on in December because of people acting on their knowledge.
They actually don't know. They don't want the information. They just want restitution. They just want punishment. They just want punishment doled out because that's the second biggest thing America loves.
Yeah. Yep.
But I mean, again, on what logical or ethical grounds would you punish them for being like, this happened to spawn in the random map generator in a province of China? Like, if China did everything they could to stop the virus and China warned everyone in a reasonable time frame about the virus, there's no moral culpability. They didn't do anything wrong.
I'm not convinced that's necessarily the case, but the point is
they haven't proven it isn't the case.
No, sure,
either.
I agree, but my point is this. Punitive punishment is not yet what matters. What matters is beating the virus.
Of course.
When you solve the health problem, you can then decide whose fault it is. Imagine we're in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, and our biggest concern is find the doctors who are responsible for this. No, end the zombie apocalypse first.
I also really enjoy that it's always Xi Jinping and not like China, the Chinese Communist Party, the burden of the finances that would ultimately fall on the Chinese people because they're the tax base for the state. No, it's Xi Jinping himself. Like, he has to go to his bank account and cut a check.
Because that's how Americans think now. They think, well, Trump financed this, Trump financed that.
Yeah.
A big man in charge does everything. Oh, China's authoritarian. They must have one dude in charge.
Should Donald Rumsfeld's estate pay for the war in Iraq?
Putin runs everything. That's how we think.
That's nothing. Like, that's not a thing. Like, in no other place except for our like designated national enemies do we ever assume that the individual leader who happens to be the head of state in a particular state is personally the entire state, including the state's finances themselves.
Right. When Sweden fucks up and there's some like problem there, we don't blame like the king or the prime minister there.
No,
we talk about Sweden at large.
Right, because it's a country. It's not like a family. It's not like there's not like a head of household who's like, all right, every single thing was me.
Should the Lannisters pay up for their evil to this? Like, that's how we think.
To be honest with you, like, there's a ton of memes that are like, oh, Winnie the Pooh, Xi Jinping, got him. Like, okay, like, Xi Jinping cracks down on this. It's like, okay, look, I understand this is not like a popular guy who's done controversial shit, but for fuck's sake.
Look, he's incontrovertibly a bad person, but so is Joe Biden. So is
like half of the world leaders. Like, they're acting like this guy's somehow uniquely bad. He's just like a realist, like every other fucking asshole politician in every country. He's no different in any meaningful way. And it's just like,
I voted for the opposition in China. What opposition? Like, what are you talking about?
Right. Yeah, it's just degrees of power, basically.
Exactly. It's just what can each country get away with. And in China, the leadership there can get away with a lot because they're in charge.
As soon as this motherfucker dies or retires or resigns or is forced out, and the next guy comes in, they'll be like, this is the worst thing to have ever happened to China. We miss Xi Jinping. Because it's always the worst thing that they've ever had. It's always the worst leader they've ever had, whichever one they have right now, because fuck them. That's always how it's framed. So who cares? None of this means anything. It's just like blatant propaganda about somehow always being the worst ever and they're the problem, and it's only ever been them that's the problem.
Yeah,
Well, reflexively, that's the case in America because that's all we see. Is
Yeah.
we see new leader come in after new leader come in, and everything keeps getting worse. And our brains can't rationalize why is that the case. We keep voting for a better guy, or we keep, doing a 180 and picking a totally different guy, and things, no matter what, always get worse. So whose responsibility is this? Whose fault is this?
Well, yeah, and it's a complete obfuscation. I have to believe to some extent intentional of how governance even works, how power is put into policy and effect. And let's just say America, since that's where we live. That every president for one side or the other is made into a villain, the worst to come, and we just pretend like the president is the be all end all for all effects and policy in our state. It's the same abroad as well, unless you live in like a small dictatorship, maybe. People just can't seem to accept anything beyond, just like we've talked about how much Americans need individual responsibility to explain away systemic problems. We need big villains. We can't ever think about the complications of statecraft or accept that as I won't even say you've alluded to, both of you, you've clearly said the fact that the flaws that we identify in these great villains exist in almost every country, almost every leader.
I've had this discussion with Alex a lot. I don't know if I've ever talked to you directly about this, Aiden, but I don't believe this is obfuscation. I think there's an innate guttural instinct amongst humans to seek out the alpha. We see it in gorillas, we see it in chimps. The alpha's in charge, the apex gorilla's in charge. They make all the rules. As humans, still in us, we love king making. We love, George Washington, we become our independent country. And the first matter of business for all the elites who took over the country now is we need to make Washington a king. We have in us this need, this desire to have a king, to have a leader, to have a single person in charge, because we can't understand the complexity of mass society of millions of people. So our gut instinct is, who to blame? Who's in charge? Who can I diffuse all my responsibility to? Because I don't want to be in charge. Because I'm just a member. I'm not the king. And so I don't think this is like intentional genius level, like spider weaving a web of lies. This is just our human nature to say who's in charge. It's their fault, or they get the credit. That's just how we operate. And obviously, we have the intelligence to overcome that. But most people don't. Most people don't think about this stuff beyond surface level stuff. And so their gut is, the Xi's in charge. It's his fault. Oh, Xi's Trump's in charge. He gets credit. That's the basic level most people are operating at, and that's my belief on that. I'm open to evidence otherwise, but to me, the evidence is mounting that is the basic level at which people think about society on a basic level.
Yeah, I think
I can't even blame them.
I mean, I wouldn't go so far personally as to say that like humans are innately hierarchical and like that they need an established hierarchy in modern times at least. And maybe that's just because I don't want to ever sound like I'm agreeing with Jordan Peterson. But
I mean, he's not wrong about the basic psychology that he says. That's been established.
I do agree that like some kind of simple magnetism, animal magnetism, if you want to call it that, certainly does come into play. But I think it can also just be, and you basically already said this, but it can be boiled down to the fact that most humans like things simple and neat, and having someone tell you what to do is simple and neat, or pointing at someone and saying everything in my life that bothers me is wrong because of one person is simple and neat. We're creatures that love to minimize energy and thought expenditure, and that's an easy way to do so.
I think before we move on, it's very funny to me that this article is written in moral terms, because it's not can we force China to pay the bill, it's should he pay the bill. So the right wing is trying to appeal to morality, which is very funny when they try to do that. But even besides that, they have not in any way indicated that they have any way of compelling China to do anything. Like, China is like the number one owner of our debt. They have nuclear weapons. They're like a mega power in their own region. How would we ever get them to pay the bill for that?
Is this on your wish list?
Yeah, it's a completely absurd statement. Because not only would they couldn't afford to possibly pay for the entire world's damage from COVID, even if they wanted to, which they obviously don't. But in order to pay it, they would be basically accepting the premise that they are culpable. which would be basically giving them a black mark for all time for no reason other than some reactionary psycho in the United States thought it would be cool if they did that. So this article is not only like just kind of very stupid, it's obviously never going to happen. So this is just written for dumb people. Like, policy people know this is incredibly stupid.
Yeah, this is not written by a wonk.
No, this is written by an idiot for an idiot, which is what makes it especially ridiculous.
Phoebe.
A useful idiot.
Yeah.
Phoebe, for idiots by idiots.
Yeah. Sorry, anyone named Phoebe, but it's not you. It's me.
Yeah.
No one named Phoebe with an F-I-B-I.
No, just the way it was pronounced.
Phoebe, but just spelled FBI. I think we'll see that within the next generation or two. So we kind of already ended up expanding beyond just,
we spent
COVID.
a long time on this. All right, what's the next one?
So we can spend some time on this, or just move on and read the headlines and move on. But because we've kind of already talked about a bias, and I don't really want to come across as like a supporter of the CCP, because I am not. But I did think that it was interesting, these two different headlines. One from the New York Times, the first one, which is Red Cradles nurture China's next generation of communist leaders. And then the second one is from an Asian news network called Nikkei Asia, which is English out, once again, Xi Jinping thought in at Shanghai schools. So
these are like, these are, Orwell would have cut these for being too on the nose.
No, I don't want to be critical, but I would like to briefly read that again, because that was such a fucking clumsy thing to try to read. To the audience, I think the way it's supposed to sound is English out, Xi Jinping thought, as its own idea, in at Shanghai schools.
That is correct. It is supposed to be a philosophy thing. I appreciate the punch up.
Yeah, because I was so confused reading and listening to that I had to do a double take.
Yeah, I felt my mouth and brain do a somersault halfway through that. So,
I mean, there's only so many articles you can write about communist China that are basically a variation on "fuck communist China." I mean, that's what they are. Like, they're not subtle. They're not really clever. It's just, hey, did you know that communist China is communist? Do you know that the communists are doing communism in China? And also, the leader of China. Do you know that the leader of China is a communist, and he's the leader of China, and he's a communist? I mean, that's what these all are. Like, you don't learn anything from any of these. It's like the guy's leader of the country. It's a one-party state, basically. I mean, technically they have sub-parties, but they're all basically approved. And he's the head of the party, so of course his thought is in at schools. Fucking George Bush's thought got in our schools when I was in high school, and he was a dumb piece of shit.
Yeah, no one freaked out.
Xi Jinping could have fucking run intellectual circles around George W. Bush. I think that's just like objective fact.
I really I enjoy just juxtaposing these for two reasons. One, because they basically say, as you point out, say the same thing, but the first one, like the New York Times, just has to be like kind of weirdly eloquent about it, by calling them red cradles. And
that's fucking racist. I don't care what I'm trying to say.
But the second one also, that the two things that I guess are supposedly supposed to be positioned as opposites are English and
Xi Jinping thought.
Yeah.
Not like now they only learn Chinese. Like,
right, which we teach it.
Imagine the opposite article. No longer Chinese will be taught in American schools. Like, what? What are you talking about? We don't need to learn Chinese. They don't need to learn English. They do it out of convenience.
Yeah, traditional Chinese out at Austin, Texas University. Who cares? Why would they ever? I mean, I'd also like to briefly point out in the previous title, the Red Cradles thing. It's not just vaguely racist by using like sort of strange language. It's actually a specific reference also to the communists in the United States, commonly referred to as red diaper babies, right? And so you were saying Red Cradles is almost like an evocation of like that's McCarthyite fear that there's like communist sympathizers even in the United States, and it's hilarious to me that the New York Times is still trying to bring that up now, as if the communists have any influence in the United States these days compared to any other historical period. But yeah, it's the thing that the New York Times always does, which is to try to basically left bait and to try to convince leftists to like come out of the woodwork to defend something obviously bad and not particularly left wing, like the Chinese Communist Party.
Which people won't.
Yeah, it never actually happens, but the implication that it might happen gets them off enough, so they publish it.
No one's gonna defend China. Yeah, they're bad. Like, we get it.
I mean, the Chinese are probably less communist than like Bernie Sanders.
Absolutely.
I mean, like, let's just be real. Like the Chinese have become a sort of center right to right wing capitalist state with a
They're
dictatorship.
just like fascist.
Like,
It's
they're-
not that complicated.
They have almost no relationship to communism in any
Just
meaningful
because you
sense.
call yourself communist doesn't mean you're left wing.
And
Just like these people who call themselves progressive who would keep the corporate tax rate the same. Like, you're not progressive then. You're trying to change the definition of a term. And you can do that, but you have to acknowledge that that's being done.
yeah, it's just because the establishment and many normal people as well still just view communism as a de facto bad and terrifying thing, and it's much easier to just get people to feel anger and adversarial towards China because of that reason, rather than trying to explain that it's because of geopolitics, which is, just as valid a reason by the media establishment's perspective, but it's, as I said, it's more complicated. So they just do this time and time again, even though it's so tired out at this point. Like China is far from a communist utopia or an attempt towards such things. I guess communist dystopia, as Americans would try to put it, and it's just moving further away from those ideals by the decade.
It's. I mean, this is not part. Not only is this like, okay, we're going to use communist as a term of abuse to just say like, it's like calling someone terrorist or calling someone.
Mhm.
It's the way that it's the way that the right talks about the center right as liberals as a term of abuse. It's terms of abuse are very common because it's a way of not only basically saying your enemy sucks without actually saying anything. It's just like the N word just for whoever.
Their identity equals bad. Right.
But it also helps reinforce in the public that this is a sort of verboten, like you can never self-identify as that thing because you're essentially abusing yourself. So if someone's like an actual communist and like, hey, I support communism in theory and principle or whatever, now they can't say that in polite company because it's like, why would you ever call yourself, the N word? It's like
yeah, well, this is why I proudly wear my left-wing labels, because like,
right.
I defend these positions.
So this is kind of like a psyop where it's basically like, even if no one's actually getting hit by it, it's creating this chilling effect where anyone who actually is a communist is like terrified to say, yes, I'm an actual communist, because they've just decided for you that that's an evil category. Whereas somehow all the people who are openly, hilariously, like self-indulgently capitalist, as it destroys the world and fails to grapple with things that almost any other system could have grappled with, that's not a problem, apparently. So there's no irony, there's no self-reflection about like what labels are considered bad suggests that the power structure that already exists and is terrible has said that they're bad. If something is a term of abuse and the power structure that is very bad for you is saying it's a term of abuse, maybe you should look into that term and consider it. Just saying.
Well, let's move on to, I've dragged my feet enough. Let's move on to talking about a place that has never suffered from America's intense boner for trying to combat communism, Afghanistan.
That's good, but people aren't going to get it. The 70s, folks.
Yeah, go. They're plenty of good podcasts, documentaries. Go do some research. You'll find out some interesting things about history. So this first one that I'm going to post is it's just chef's kiss, in my opinion. It's from CNN Business. The Taliban are sitting on $1 trillion worth of minerals the world desperately needs.
I was literally going to lead with this next time.
Oh
so
my
I'm glad you already brought it in.
The world, though, deserves these minerals.
One of the funniest and most blatantly saying the quiet part loud titles I've ever seen.
Whereas the American regime is sitting on, $16 trillion worth of labor, oil, farmland, industry, construction, factories that the world desperately needs.
Yeah, they ripped the
mask off the end of my dick
so hard they ripped their face off as well. It's yeah.
I mean, almost anyone who's currently alive can remember when the Bush administration was like, "We're not in it for oil. How dare you assert such scandalous things against us? We're great humanitarians." Like even the right wing, within our last 2 decades was like, okay, we have to pretend we're not just vicious extractivists. We have to pretend.
And then everyone loved Trump for going, of course we should have taken their oil.
Yeah.
The right wing loved that shit. They ate that up.
We tried for so long to pretend as both a country and essentially as the colonizing world, including most of Europe, for the last several hundred years, that this was always like manifest destiny, white man's burden, humanitarianism, not peacekeeping. Like we always found ways of doing our horrific imperialism and colonial extraction and saying this was justified by something that was a higher noble principle. And this article's just like, what if we robbed them blind? Like it's inconceivable that we do not colonize and extract the resources from this place that we've destroyed even more.
If you're listening, you think that this is an extreme perspective, that we're being too suspicious or taking too much of this, I mean, understand that the U.S. has, as a historical fact, facilitated coups that resulted in millions of people's deaths for things like countries banking with the wrong other countries or on behalf of fruit companies. This is just history. You think that when we're talking about trillions of dollars of minerals, that this isn't saying what we're saying? Then, I mean, it's too obvious. It's too easy. It's too out there. This was one headline I had to read a couple times.
You got baited. You had to read it,
and I had to open it today to make sure it hadn't been edited.
What's in the box?
I love that this is also somehow a right-wing attack on Biden, because he's now pulled out of this mineral extraction plant that we should have been running, apparently. Like, it's like, we need more Vespine gas. Like they're literally shouting at him that he's not harvesting the Afghanistan territory and population, just grinding them into paste. Because apparently 20 years of horrific sectarian violence and endless war is not extractive enough.
Man, Bush fucked up. He should have just annexed Afghanistan. Because then we could say this is our land. Because it's not our state, so we can't say this is our land to take the resources from.
2 decades of U.S. Deep state agencies most likely harvesting almost all of the opium and reselling it is not enough extraction. 2 decades of installing U.S. contractors and their allies in all the positions and controlling the land resources of the country. That's not nearly enough extraction, Mac. Get back in there. Like, what did they want us to do?
You almost got the sense that Biden was like, mission success. We extracted enough, time to leave.
Right.
And keep digging in. It's endless feast. It's welcome to Caesar's. Whatever, endless buffalo wings. Whatever, welcome to Olive Garden.
Well, Caesar's actually, it's like at the tail end of the Roman Empire when they're like thinking of abandoning England because it's just too expensive to hold. And they're like, Britain is sitting on... the Celts are sitting on a mountain of resources that the Roman Empire really needs. But of course, it didn't
right,
actually.
Just be honest. Don't say the world needs. Just say we desperately need.
Right. Because the world means the rich in the first world.
Yeah, that we want.
Yeah.
or I should say that we perhaps need, but don't want to pay anything for, basically.
I mean, it should be noted. I mean, they're obviously trying to disguise this by saying the Taliban, because it's like, well, official enemy evil group, therefore justifies whatever horrible thing we're about to say. Mm-hmm. But as horrible as the Taliban are, and they are horrible,
and they've been horrible since we done deals with them.
At least they're Afghani. Yeah. I mean, at least it's their fucking country. Like, even if they're not supposed to be in control of it, they live there. Most of them grew up there. Like, they're at least some claim between them and the resources in that country. Whereas the United States, and this is always how we act, the United States reserves the right to judge the moral value of anyone on Earth, and if you are lacking according to our arbitrary standards that we never hold ourselves to either, your mineral resources are justifiably ours. And if that absurd premise strikes you as an absurd premise, good luck dealing with U.S. foreign policy, because that's what it is.
Also, it's almost like if we had not started the war in Afghanistan, maybe the Taliban would have lost their power fight to run Afghanistan.
Well, yeah.
It's almost like us waging a war there emboldened them and raised their troops and gave them more reason to become the only ones in charge, and it is why they're in charge. It's almost like imperialism does the opposite thing of what everyone says it will do. I'm getting heated.
The Soviets also tried to do the same thing to Afghanistan, and until like the 70s, I mean, there was a pretty good window where Afghanistan was a fairly modern country and it was fairly technologically advanced. It had
I
a
read
fairly
Kite Runner.
deep civil
I
society.
remember.
The reality is Afghanistan is not just a pockmarked, mountainous desert wasteland with no one of culture or civilization.
Not fucking Mad Max.
There's an obsessing site as far as we're concerned. And it is not. It is only even remotely close to that as the result of these imperial projects, as the result of generation after generation of people being horrifically tortured and abused and exploited and murdered by various global empires for the sake of this $1 trillion of minerals the world desperately needs.
Yeah.
Honestly, just name the article "The Case for Imperialism" again.
Right. Yeah.
It's why it kind of irritates me when you see people post online or wherever, hear them say this, talking about how Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires, because once again it centers the empires, not the people who have
Not Afghanistan and Ukraine, the ultimate victims of a bunch of scumbag empires trying to take their shit. Because Ukraine also has a very long history of trying to be conquered over and over and over again by many different empires. This story is very similar with Afghanistan and Persia and Iraq.
Yeah.
And so the point is not, look, all these empires failed when they tried to get there. Oh, Napoleon failed, he tried to get to Russia. Stop victimizing people. Stop trying to take people's shit over and over and over again.
America says no.
And Afghanistan is literally the region talked about in the famous book, The Man Who Would Be King, about white imperialist adventurers thinking that they can take over a kingdom for themselves of what they consider to be lesser and savage peoples, massively overreaching and getting murdered. That was written by Rudyard Kipling like 120 years ago. Like, this was predicted with a level of foresight that Nostradamus would weep that this would happen when the West tried to get its imperial clutches in what is essentially an unholdable territory, because it is way too culturally different.
The fucking military generals have been telling us it's unholdable.
Right. And so, like, you cannot say you were not warned. Like, this has been well established since, like, British imperialism era. Let alone American, let alone Soviet, any of that.
There are infinite cases at this point, even just including modern history, from the Boer Wars in South Africa to whatever you want to talk about from South America. Are many attempts there. I mean, the case in American imperialism is that in modern history we focused on two things: fighting communism, it seems, whether genuinely or as an excuse, and seizing valuable resources without any thought to long-term consequences. And it always turns out to hurt us in the end, putting aside even the much more real suffering of the people who die en masse and suffer en masse in the countries that we're operating within, completely illegally, of course, by any law that you might look to find.
By laws we have passed at a world level.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, laws that we signed on to, and then just said, for thee, not for me. But I want to get your guys' opinion on something. We briefly touched on how this headline talks about the Taliban, references them to obviously try to incite negative feelings immediately and get the reader on the side of the author. This next one is from the Washington Post again. Biden administration freezes billions of dollars in Afghan reserves, depriving Taliban of cash. Now, boys, how do we feel about sanctions?
Oh, God.
I mean, it's the go-to.
Yeah.
Our favorite thing.
And I feel like most people think it's like a safe, non-violent thing. Like, it doesn't really have the cost that war could have, right?
When you actually learn and study diplomacy, sanctions are the last resort. Sanctions are, we couldn't reach diplomatic agreements. They're not supposed to be step fucking one.
I mean, they're a form of violence because people die because of the sanctions. So when people say like, "Oh, it's sanctions as opposed to a violent solution," no, sanctions kill enormous numbers of people because you deprive life-saving medicine, food, water, electricity, the components needed to build shelter, the components needed to create a functioning economy and civil
And
society.
even hawks would agree that sanctions are worse than direct conflict, because direct conflict at least ostensibly kills the people you're trying to kill, whereas sanctions almost always just kill the poor and needy.
It has been estimated that between the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War, U.S. sanctions killed more people, almost all of them were civilians, in Iraq than the consequences of the Iraq War killed. And that is a pretty fucking horrifying statistic, because those sanctions gathered almost zero pushback or concern from the American left, as such as it is, or even from much of the international community. Because it was just like, America does sanctions, it's what we do. And all the children who die of, preventable childhood illnesses, all the elderly people whose hospitals didn't have power, all of the modernized systems that all fell apart and degraded in the late era of Saddam's rule because these sanctions turned the country into basically a medieval era economy from a 2000s economy. Yeah, those people never get recorded. No one cares.
We talked about this last time with Cuba. It's like, Cuba's so far behind. Yeah, because we sanctioned them. And they still came up with their own vaccine. They still have a better healthcare system than us. Imagine how the world would look if America stopped sanctioning countries and just let them flourish on their own.
Well, and we wouldn't be the king shit. I mean, it's just an exertion of American power. The whole point is to show fuck you. Like, it's the way that America says fuck you, but just ever so slightly more polite than a direct missile strike. That's it.
Yeah. We won't necessarily explode you and your loved ones. We'll just burn your crops and prevent the imported medicine and everything else that you need to survive, and the continuously lowering living conditions that we're forcing on you, where you'll need those things more and more day by day. It's polite. Clean hands.
It's the ghettoization, and I don't mean in the sort of vaguely racist modern American use. I mean literally like the Nazi use of creating an environment which is not directly fatal, but which is eventually fatal to its inhabitants, of depriving them of the resources needed to have a meaningful life and eventually any life. And when you deprive people of the basic necessities of life and kind of slowly watch them wither on the vine and die, I would argue that you're even more sadistic and insane than someone who just commits murder. Because you think you're a fucking hero when you put sanctions on. Like, these people win Nobel Prizes. Like, these people get like invitations to speak at charity dinners and stuff who are putting sanctions in these countries. And they're not like, they don't have to account for all the dead people. They don't have to account for all the miserable suffering people. They can just go like, oh, it's worth it. It was worth it. It's like, well, by that logic, dropping nuclear weapons on people is worth it, I guess, if you get your outcome. If achieving, American imperial objectives is worth it, then you're basically just saying the ends justify the means, do whatever the fuck you want. Because that's the only rationale that they've ever really used that makes sanctions make any sense. They're not even denying that it kills a huge number of people. It's just like, well, it was the only resort we had short of war. And it's like, well, prove that it's even less damaging than war. Because a lot of times they really couldn't.
Yeah, and I don't know about you guys, but so often when I see articles talking about living conditions and suffering within countries that the U.S. is currently imposing sanctions on, it's largely framed in a way that suggests that suffering is not at all related to the sanctions. That the sanctions is just hurting the tyrants that those people are suffering under, and that the conditions that they're living within are the result of how the tyrants choose to treat them, whether you're talking about Yemen or whatever other country. It's like, the term sanctions has been so cleanly sanitized in the way that the news talks about it and the way that we talk about it in America or anywhere else in the Western world, at the very least, as my only real reference point. But yeah, the consequences are enormous and very, very real to the people who live underneath that kind of austerity.
I would also like to say that it is very well known, both to the academic community, the international community, and of course the policymakers themselves, that when you sanction a country, the only people you don't hurt are the leaders, because they're in control of the resources of the country. And in times of scarcity, they simply hoard the resources for themselves. Which means what the article should really be saying is, Biden administration freezes billions of dollars in Afghan reserves, depriving the Afghani poor of life and basic quality,
driving them towards radicalism.
It will not hurt the Taliban. Yeah, it will not hurt the Taliban, because the Taliban will be able to say two things. One, look what America's done to us and continuing to do to us. Maybe you should join the people resisting them. And two, we're just going to hoard all the resources because we're already in power and we're not going to go hungry. So the equivalent in domestic situations, like if DCF was like, okay, there's an abusive father, how can we help the children? Let's only send one meal to the house a day and ban them from buying their own food. Well, who's going to eat that meal? Is it going to be the kids? Is it going to be the battered wife? No, it's going to be the abusive husband. So it doesn't even make sense. It doesn't remotely accomplish the fundamental premise. The only person who has power in the country is going to be the person who hoards the life-saving resources. And in fact, the distribution of those life-saving resources gives them even more clout, which was the whole fight in fucking, Somalia over the distribution of UN aid. If you're the warlord who has control of the food and distributes it to your people, you build a following that way. When you create artificial scarcity through these sanctions, you actually give more power to the mafia-like institutions and black markets that control the scarce resources. It's one of the most counterproductive things to its own rhetoric possible.
Yeah, it doesn't hold up to even just common sense scrutiny at all.
And it's just sick because it is consistently put in media terms as like a heroic, noble act to fight dictatorships over time in like a patient, like liberal style reformist way, as if things that take time are therefore reformist. We're reforming him with a lifetime jail sentence. Like that's what that is like.
Yeah, slow torture is so much better than intense violence.
Yeah.
So I hope you listening do have some historical context so that you'll find this as funny as I did. This is another piece from the Washington Post. This one, an op-ed. Opinion: the Mujahideen resistance to the Taliban begins now.
That's
amazing. My God, that's so good.
Is this the Onion article? Please, God, let it be.
Is this a real one?
Posting the link now.
Okay.
God damn it!
I believed it was real, but it was just absurd enough that I was like, maybe.
I don't understand. Do these people, the people who write these articles, think we don't have access to the internet? We could just go to Wikipedia or go to Google and type in, like, who are the Mujahideen?
You know what? Do one of you want to briefly explain why this is funny to us?
I gotta go take a shit. I'm mad.
This is an anger shit. So before I even get into that, because I mean that is worth getting into.
Yeah.
I want to briefly talk about how little the U.S. previously claimed or had any understanding of what Arabs and Muslims were, because we invaded Iraq because George Bush and Dick Cheney felt like it, and Donald Rumsfeld felt like it, not because there was any weapons of mass destruction, not because there was any rationale, but the lies told to the American people, and aided in this by all the Democrats too, because they're all pieces of shit, was that they had some sort of role in 9/11, and that they had some sort of role in like the vaguely terror apparatus of the Middle East in attacking the United States. And taking away our freedoms somehow, even though that was the Patriot Act. And the absurdity of not seeing the distinction between Iraq, a country which had 0 participants in 9/11, which was actively at the time suppressing radical Islamist groups, because Saddam Hussein was a dictator who was relatively secular and despised the radical Islamists because they threatened his power.
Still a scumbag, let it be mentioned.
Also a piece of shit for other reasons, also one of our puppets for other reasons. The inability to distinguish between Saddam Hussein's Ba'athist party, which was originally a socialist, but at that point basically just a nationalist dictatorship. The inability to distinguish between that and the 9/11 hijackers, almost all of whom were from Saudi Arabia, our ally. That was too hard to distinguish. We cannot tell the difference, apparently, between people who are completely complicit in something and people who are in no way complicit in something. What we can distinguish are between different versions of radical far-right Islamic jihadists who have mostly the same exact view of the world.
I'm just going to put it out there. The Taliban and the Mujahideen are essentially the same people.
They're basically the same guys.
When Russia invaded Afghanistan in the 70s, the Mujahideen, the freedom fighters, had amongst their members Osama bin Laden, who we provided ordnance, small arms training, small arms, and direct cash with. We trained the Mujahideen, also known as the future Taliban, how to fight, how to kill, how to disguise, how to do guerrilla warfare. And then we Pikachu face when 30 years later, they do those exact things we trained them and financed them to do to us. And now, 20 years have gone by, and everyone's brain has exploded. And we're like, hang on, let's do it again. Oh my God.
It should be mentioned that even though the Mujahideen are not a specific group,
it's a word that just means like freedom fighter.
It's a word. It's an Arabic word that literally means like an Islamist guerrilla fighting against a state or many states,
like holy
to
warrior
achieve an end. It's a variant term on, as you say, like holy warrior fighting for a jihad, like Mujahideen referring to the jihad they are fighting on, one who wages jihad. And it gained its popular currency recently, as Jason was alluding to, in literally the Afghanistan war against the Soviets. Osama bin Laden was a significant component of the Mujahideen.
His family were amongst the Mujahideen who we funded and trained.
9/11 was literally funded and planned by the Mujahideen associated with Osama bin Laden, the number one enemy on America's kill list for like a decade, because it took us that long to kill him, apparently, which is also bizarre, pathetic. But these are the people we're now hoping will fight the Taliban, another significant part of the Mujahideen.
But the thing is, they are the Taliban. The Taliban were just the Mujahideen that got in charge.
Literally, this is like saying, if you return these phrases into things that like are English equivalents, it would be like saying, let's hope that the communists are overthrown by the revolutionary fighters.
Let's hope Marjorie Taylor Greene is overthrown by another psycho right-wing chick running for office next year.
What are they talking about? Thing. They're literally synonymous, or at the very least, subcategories of one another. Like, not all Mujahideen are Taliban, but all Taliban are Mujahideen. So, what, are they hoping a different far-right Islamist group kills them and that's somehow good?
I have no fucking idea.
Like, what, do they want ISIS to take over in Afghanistan? Is that better? Like, what are they talking about? Which Mujahideen are they saying are good? Which of these people? Who are these people?
Yeah, the fact that it is so absurdly confusing, it makes me wonder if it's another like mask off moment. Like, are they just, because that's the only way I can interpret it. Are they just saying like, we need to fund more disgruntled, ex-generals or ex-colonels or religious fighters, but ones that will take our money and do our bidding for like maybe half a decade before they gain power or gain their own kind of infrastructure and turn it towards their own ends. I don't know what this article could possibly be suggesting.
I mean, the Taliban only even took over Afghanistan for a total of 5 years. They were in charge from 96 to 2001, when we came in and blew them back into the, ID holes all over the country. And in the next 20 years, again, 4 times as long, the United States has been administering, essentially, Afghanistan for 4 times as long as the Taliban ever had a chance to. And in that time of more or less total control of all the centers of real power and resources in the country, we had 20 years to recruit and arm and train a functional government and military and society that could resist the Taliban. We had all these Mujahideen kicking around at that time too, and we could have tried to get them to join us instead of the fucking Taliban if that was really a realistic thing. Anyone who's like, I want to do Islamic far-right radical violence, but maybe I'll do it for the US. Like, if you somehow had a pitch for that, that was the time to make it. The time to make it is not after the 20 years are up and you leave. Because that's absurd. Like, we only pulled out because all the options like this were obviously not working. There's nothing that's going to work, because if it was going to work, we wouldn't have left in a pathetic way and everything falling apart. We left in the way we did because that was always going to be the way we did, because there was no solution. Saying, what if it's this solution? We had all this time. It would have been the solution.
Did a 40-year-old hermit write this, who maybe wasn't around to know about the war in between the Soviets and the Mujahideen? Someone who's like, I woke up from a coma from 2020, from 2018. I don't know what the pandemic is. I don't know what anything is. I don't know where getting out of Afghanistan. Oh, what's this? Like, You can't. This one, I agree. You know, before I was saying sometimes you can't blame people for being so like obscuring because they're just stupid, like with always needing to be a kingmaker. But with this, I can shoot my ire and fury and my evil eye at them because this is obvious horseshit evil they're trying to lie to us about. And anyone who reads this should be offended as a human being that they're going to try to pull the wool over your face for the nth time, for the 1,000th time.
The fall of Afghanistan, a chance for the Mujahideen to inch away from the Taliban.
Whoever wrote this should be scared because no one should say this is okay. This isn't okay.
Oh my God.
Well,
I think this is actually the dumbest one we've read. Like, actually, this may actually be dumber than even like the shower one or the holy shit.
well, let's save ourselves then. Move on from.
I want some bubonic chipmunks. Where's that at?
Dumb headlines and obscuring the truth to something heartfelt that connects to people on a personal level. From Reuters, former U.S. President Bush expresses deep sadness over Afghan situation.
Yeah, I bet.
You know what this reminds me of? The BP oil spill when South Park did the episode like, we're sorry. We're really sorry we did that. We're sorry. We're not sorry for getting all the oil and using it and exploiting people, ruining people's lives and killing people. We're sorry the spill happened. We're sorry. I'm deeply sad about all that exploitation.
What?
You know, Rockefeller comes out at the end of his life. I'm really deeply saddened by all the Chinese people I had killed building my railroad. I'm deeply saddened by all the steel I used. I'm deeply saddened by all the prospectors I fucked. I'm deeply saddened by the unions I busted with Pinkertons. Fuck you.
It's such a shame that 150,000 people died building the Panama Canal. So sad.
God.
Yeah.
I'd like to propose a alternative headline, if you will.
Please do.
Is a punch-up of two that we've already seen, but that's simply better. Should former President George W. Bush pay the bill for the Afghan situation? Discuss.
Well, it's like you were saying with Rummy.
Yeah.
I mean, he has all this time to make all these wonderful paintings that he's making.
Here's the problem. He doesn't have the money because single-handedly from 1999 when Bill Clinton got out of office and we had a multi-trillion-dollar surplus to now where we have like a $20 trillion debt. A non-insignificant chunk of that money is because of the Afghanistan war. He'd have to come up with like $15 trillion. Which, I'm sorry, I don't care how many space bucks you have. No one has that.
No one has. It's an astronomical cost. It's an astronomical loss of life and resources and wealth and time and trust and political efficacy of both our political system and theirs.
And it's not even like all that money was redistributed. A lot of it was just burned.
No, it was just burned like the Joker burning money because he doesn't need it. Like, it was just straight up wasted and squandered, and it cannot be recovered. It could never be paid back. There is no paying back something like that. And the idea that anyone should give a solitary fuck about what Bush now thinks about Iraq and Afghanistan after having intentionally duped us into destroying these countries at the immense expense of our own population and even more immense theirs is criminal. Like, this guy should have been prosecuted by the Hague 19 years ago.
No. Listen, partner. He's just a simple Texan who thought they had nasty weapons. All right.
It's equivalent to saying thoughts and prayers. Fuck off.
Adolf Eichmann expresses deep regret over the events of the Holocaust. What? That's not an article.
Yeah, I mean, many angry leftists have shouted about this already, but the amount of reputation rehabilitation that's been going on around George W. Bush is truly upsetting to me. Still, just to paint him as a sweet old man who, they just bumbled his way through his presidency and through these conflicts that have taken, as we said, incomprehensible amounts of funding and damages and direct funding to our military, and have killed hundreds of thousands, millions of people. It's truly absurd that anyone could write a headline like this and not add any kind of small addendum to it about like just put like asterisk bad person next to George W. Bush at least. Just give me something, please.
Unambiguous monster, President George W. Bush expresses deep sad. Like, at least, something. Like, a lot of people thought, okay, so he's going on Ellen and shit, and it's like, well, that's going to rehabilitate his image. At least personally, all that did for me was damage Ellen's image. Like,
Sure.
I don't think that you can take something as toxic an asset as George W. Bush or any of his administration and, like, put them in a, pet the dog enough moment to ever rehabilitate them like a millimeter for anyone who not only knows what actually happened, which should be all of us, and
But
cares about what happens or happened, which should be at least most of us. I mean, the idea that, like, war crimes on a scale that's not been rivaled since Vietnam at least, is just brushed off with, like, he was a sweet Texan man and he did the best. Like, I don't know. Like, that is one of the most embarrassing and deeply shameful things that I've even had to live with as being a fucking American. Like, when I was traveling abroad during the fucking height of the Iraq War, it was like you hit your face. Like, people in other countries are like, "What the fuck is wrong with your people?" And I was like, "I didn't want it. It wasn't me." Like, if you being an American at that time was basically like fucking wearing a Nazi armband during Vichy France or something. It was like you were marked because of the fucking evil we were doing around the world and just glaringly doing around the world. And I'm not saying I suffered in any meaningful sense compared to any of the actual crimes of this, but I only use it to mention, like, this was one of the most shameful and repugnant things we've ever done, and this guy is still getting pats on the back and, like, asked to feed popsicles to children.
Yeah, and I think it's because an enormous amount of liberals were successfully duped by this idea that, like, he had no autonomy. He was just the silly guy who said, "Fool me once, whatever, fuck me twice."
It's not even that. It's that he says the right words. He did the action they all wanted, which is wealth extraction. But he says he feels sorry about it. Joe Biden's identical. Libs love Joe Biden, not because he does policies that are different from the norm, but because he seems sad about it. Kamala Harris feels bad as she's having you arrested and prosecuting you and stealing your children.
I mean, sadly, she doesn't.
That's
Feels
what's
really
bad.
That's why people hate her.
She
isn't
says
it?
Yeah.
she feels
She's not good at it. She's pretending.
like Joe Biden feels bad when he kicks you off your health care. Joe Biden feels bad when you get kicked out of your house because you owe too much rent. Libs just want you to feel bad for your place in society. They don't want you to change your place in society. They want you to just acknowledge that you should be feeling bad about it.
Which is why Obama was their favorite guy, because he was the best at that. He was the best consoler in chief.
Yeah,
That's all they wanted.
incredibly good rhetorician. Yeah,
they just wanted a West Wing guy to say it's okay and pat you on the back as you die. They don't want you to live. They want you to die with dignity. And by dignity, I mean a good speech.
Man, I'm so mad.
Well, I apologize if these are miserable headlines. I promise.
It's not your fault. These are just like my meter is just pulsating, like filling. I need to pop my ultimate.
Yeah, exactly. You have to use your all. You have to do something.
After my last shift, I did filter out a bunch that were unambiguously just like doomer fuel. So we've been talking a lot about America's relation to Afghanistan and to the world. But other countries are certainly better, right, guys?
This week we're sponsored by Molan Laib. Go buy a gun. Like, holy shit, I'm mad.
So
what's the next one?
From the AFP news agency. Have you guys heard of that before?
Heard the name, but I don't know what it is.
I hadn't heard of it before. But Macron vows EU initiative to protect against migrant flows.
They're preempting it.
Yeah,
that's great. Because the biggest thing, like for 2014 to 2017, was like, oh no, ISIS is big and kicking all the Syrians out, and everyone knows that fleeing Syrians who are fleeing from ISIS must be terrorists, right? It's just going to be the same thing over again, except this news cycle, it's going to be fleeing Afghani civilians who are now we're going to call terrorists. Unbelievable.
The only reason why anyone in France was told it was important to elect this banker's wet dream piece of shit as their leader after having actual vaguely socialist options in recent history was because Marine Le Pen was going to be a racist, fascist asshole if she got in power and she was the runner-up. because she would do things like ban Muslims and Arabs from France. What are you doing, Macron? How's it going?
Yeah, he has long since revealed himself as a, I would say, a right wing politician. Like he's a protectionist. He is far, it seems, from. I don't really need to speak on it. Like just you could just re-listen to the headline I just read. Yeah, this is a huge problem in Europe in general. Like I read about it fairly extensively in coverage of the UK. There's just this. I mean, and it makes sense because they are most directly affected as being closer than America and North America in general to these Arab countries. But there is an enormous anti-Arab movement there, and it seems that those sentiments extend all the way to the quote unquote liberal progressive leadership that they've elected. A pretty horrifying thing to announce with your full chest as people are fleeing for their lives.
Yeah, because this title is obviously insanely deceptive. It should really say something like, Macron vows EU initiative to void international law and seek to stymie, refugees fleeing for their life. Like, because the migrant flows is an insane thing to call this. Who is fleeing Afghanistan right now?
It's not people. It's an object. It's a movement. Yeah.
And it's not the Taliban.
It's like water. We're all Bruce Lee. Be like water, my immigrants.
If you're a Taliban guy or a Mujahideen who's somehow different than the Taliban, you're staying. You just won. You're hanging out. You're hanging dong. Like, you just won. Why would they be going to France? The people going to France are the people who are terrified of those people.
We just can't get these immigrants to adapt to being French.
Do they think in like the last 3 minutes that the Taliban have been in control of the country, they've already organized a secret espionage cabal to send fighters to France just to like kill a guy with a knife?
Yes.
Oh my god, it's so dumb.
In your mother's face. Yes.
It's so dumb.
This reveals to me the subtext that we try to keep hidden so often. I don't want to say we, I guess not us, but Western countries in general, Western media,
world,
try to keep hidden, which is that, like, I mean, this has been the case since like the Cold War era, and even a bit before that, a few decades before that. But the change in the way that we talk about things, or that things are packaged, whereas it's completely in absolutes. It's the most famous case is obviously communism. We're seeing that come back today, where if everything is either communism or it's not, if it's at all related to communism, it's the worst evil ever to exist. It's the same with Arabs and Muslims in
why do we even bother imperializing these countries if we hate the people?
Well, that's the thing, is that what this reveals, at least to me so blatantly, is that what is being said is that there aren't good and bad Muslims. There are Muslims who are under the direct
Please
control.
don't stop saying it like that. We're not from England. It hurts me.
I mean, that's how I was taught in
really
middle school. But
really,
You're just wearing too much muslin.
That is wild. That's like how they say it in fucking like V for Vendetta.
The Muslim men, yeah. Want to go really archaic and use the terms from like 200 years ago?
Sure.
The Saracens.
Yeah.
Basically, there aren't good Muslims and bad Muslims, as we seem to be trying to say. And I'm not saying that the Taliban aren't an evil force in how they treat Afghanis. But what I am saying is that this is clearly saying that all Arabs are a threat. The only Arabs that aren't a threat are those who are under the direct jurisdiction of the U.S. military or Western military.
Yeah, it's they liked black people when they were slaves, and the instant they were emancipated, they were a terrifying danger. in the United States, at least. Like, it's the exact same thing. They're a perfect, flawless being as long as they have zero autonomy or ability to control themselves.
Yeah.
And white people have the literal chains around their necks in that case, or the metaphorical chains around their necks in this one. And as soon as that's removed, they're terrifying monsters and they must be exterminated. Because like the white supremacist imperialist logic is pretty clear. White countries and wealthy Western countries must be in control of everything at all times. And if they slip for even a second, then the dirty, evil browns and darks of various kinds and Asiatics, or whatever fucking race science, is substituted for logic at deep state agencies. Yeah, those people can't be allowed to be autonomous. Because if they are, they will do anything that's against American interest, also known as being terrorists. I don't know, because that's the only logic that makes sense to me of how our policies actually work.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, do you guys want? Do you guys want to talk about this? There's this article from the Washington Post again, going back there. Democrats offer some harsh reviews of Biden on Afghanistan.
Wait, what is this, Kotaku?
Oh my god.
7.5. What is this?
This is another one of those Democrats and Biden are different articles.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they mean like, Senate and House compared to...
Right.
I mean, why... We don't do reviews. What the fuck's a review of a politician? Was this like we're NRA grading him? Like, stop! We don't give grades to politicians.
Yeah.
We elect them or get rid of them.
Yeah.
It's pass-fail, motherfucker.
Biden's big summer blockbuster, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, flop as coronavirus keeps people out of theaters.
Christ. Biden has too many bugs. Needs to be thrown in, repatched. I mean, come on.
They're the person who wanted a guy who was on like his last iteration before being scrapped as obsolete.
This is exactly what the Democratic establishment wants. The same way Joe Manchin is the butt plug that prevents all the shit from flowing out, so too is Biden. Biden is the outlet with which all Democrats get to pretend they're cool and say, oh, well, we're mad at Biden for doing exactly what we wanted the entire time for 20 fucking years.
And of course they did. Yeah.
Yeah. They're such pussies.
You have to be an idiot to write this sincerely. Like, whoever wrote this, you're dumb. Or you're a scumbag. Choose which is better.
If there is a Democrat in the Democratic Party, anywhere in it, who thinks that Joe Biden is not right-wing enough on foreign policy, join the Republican Party. Join the Republican Party! Because Joe Biden is as right-wing as you can possibly fucking get as a Democrat. He voted with Republicans all the time. Like, this motherfucker was so right-wing that he literally just said, I'm not even going to pay attention to the zeitgeist of 2016 or 2020. I'm going to do my own thing, which is just what I've always done, which is be a right-wing hack. That's not enough. The Democrats want to become the Republicans. They're deeply envious of them. They want to have a party where the most insane fringe right-wing thing is always the default position, and they don't have to apologize for it. And any sort of pullback that's like, we're not going to be maximally imperialist, pathetic. I can't believe he's done this.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's just like a deflection extravaganza right now among Democrats. I like the way that we withdrew from Afghanistan is a complete disaster and a mess, even though it was a necessary thing in the end. But it's everyone is just wringing their hands, pretending like the fact that the Taliban took over Afghanistan so quickly was something that no one could have seen coming. Like that they would never have signed on or supported Biden in this movement if they had any clue that the Taliban still existed in Afghanistan. It's just like so disingenuous, and it's just them trying to cover their asses and trying to, as you say, Alex, like be some kind of weird echo chamber and reflection of what the right is right now. It's really pathetic to watch. Unsurprising, but pathetic.
I saw a bunch of articles, and I don't know if you're going to use one of these, but sorry if I do. Preempted.
No, go ahead.
There were a whole bunch of things like, is this the next Saigon? It sure looks a lot like Saigon.
Yeah.
Images of Saigon, as it's like everyone's just saying Saigon 100 times in the newsfeed. I was like, it's so annoying to me, I'm not even going to use one of them. But the comparison to Vietnam is obvious because you have a impoverished country out in Asia with a guerrilla movement that somehow manages to defeat the United States despite the enormous advantages the United States has. And the lessons of Vietnam, apparently, for the average media article, were don't get caught with your ass hanging out when you vacate your blunder. That was the only lesson they learned. Because the framing, apparently the media thinks that the most important thing is that the United States maintains face and maintains dignity in evacuating from blunders. Because what none of them said was, perhaps like what happened in Saigon, a horrifically unpopular, basically right-wing dictatorship in the form of the South Vietnamese government got replaced by a different dictatorship. And in the end result, the country basically got better. Like, Vietnam today is not particularly communist. And the people are more in favor of their government than they were when it was in a civil war with each other. So instead of saying we can learn from Vietnam that the United States should never have been engaged in insane imperialism based on a false domino theory and should not be even getting itself into situations where we create Saigons, instead it's just like, once again, how much of Biden's asshole is visible when we pull out of another imperial blunder? Not the question. That's not the question.
Domino theory, by the way, which McNamara just pulled out of his ass.
Yeah, absolute bullshit.
We have learned not a goddamn thing from Vietnam, despite the fact that that's supposedly like the big national trauma all the way up to 9/11 when that suddenly displaced it. But you can go to Washington D.C. today, you can go check out that Vietnam memorial, and you can look at like the 56,000 dead, and you're not going to see a memorial for the 2.5 million dead Vietnamese. You're not going to see a memorial for the Cambodians and Laotians butchered illegally, as if the war in Vietnam was legal either. But the millions and millions of people, almost all of whom were civilians, who were murdered because it was an illegal war and it was a war of aggression, the supreme international crime.
By people like John McCain.
Murdered by the United States. Yeah, murdered by the United States in a callous and totally unforgiving and totally unapologetic way. They have no memory. There's no memory of them here. They may as well have never existed. In fact,
Exactly.
if they ever are brought up, they were the bad ones, instead of the victims of a horrific genocidal war of aggression by an imperialist country with no reason to be there whatsoever. And that is not the framing that is ever going to be discussed when you're talking about the Saigon-like pullout from Afghanistan. Because if it was, we'd have to acknowledge that Afghanistan's basically the same thing. It's basically the same thing. The connection between Afghanistan and 9/11 was about as tenuous as the connection between like Gulf of Tonkin and a logical reason to invade Vietnam.
Here's what I'm going to get to. At least today, there's not huge amounts of racial resentment against Vietnamese. Like, specifically.
Yeah.
I mean, sure, there's like general xenophobia, which we've talked about a lot, but there's no like them fucking Vietnamese. Whereas with Afghanistan, it's just worse. Like, we just think they're all horrible people who are all terrorists, who are all willing to explode, who all don't speak English, all hate our freedom, and all hate the West. Like, it's just the 21st century Vietnam, where it's Vietnam, but just like we hate them even more. It's just fucked. It's just fucked. It's just fucked.
And there's so many more Muslims than there are Vietnamese. It's incredible dissonance.
Although there probably aren't more Arabs than there are Asians, or even Muslims than there are Asians in general. But who knows? Who's counting?
And also, they're all Asians because they're in Asia. But
Well, yeah, I know.
at least as far as the Middle East is concerned.
Well,
Yeah.
I have two more pieces. I'm gonna try to kind of ease us towards a slightly more lighthearted.
You're going to inch away from depression.
Well, one could dream. How do we think that the New York Times elite op-ed community is dealing with is coping
Elite op for sure.
with the trauma
It's not opinion.
of withdrawing from Afghanistan?
They're snorting that good copium.
Well, this is how Thomas Friedman is by
Oh, come on, let's not talk about Friedman. All right, fine, let's read it.
we're gonna
Friedman's the worst.
briefly at worst. It's just funny because he's just like jerking off basically. So the article is 3 people I would interview about Afghanistan.
Oh, please
What
tell
do you
us
think-
the 3. Oh, okay.
What do you think the contents of the op-ed is?
Well, we have to guess who the 3 are, right?
Have you
Sure.
read it?
I have read it. Yep.
Okay.
Well, Rumsfeld died.
He's not one of them.
I'd interview the corpse of Rumsfeld.
I will say, do not exclude dead people though.
What? Okay, Julius Caesar. Is that one of them?
Nope, it's not.
How about Napoleon?
I don't even remember who it was, but like the Soviet premier who invaded them the first time, George W. Bush and Osama bin Laden.
All great choices, but over 3.
Oh my
Jesus
God. Dick Cheney and Bush? Oh wait, no, you already said Bush. Dick Cheney?
Nope.
Dead people though, right? There's at least one dead?
At least one dead, yep.
Okay. Muhammad Ali.
Oh, that would be so good. but no.
Is it some random Muslim just to fuck it with a Cat Stevens or something? Like, is it?
Malcolm X.
Yeah.
MLK.
All right, I'll post them. I'll post them out and read them out. The 3 are
inscrutable.
President Lyndon Johnson. Once again, Xi Jinping makes a return. And the last king of Afghanistan, Mohammed Zahir Shah.
God damn it.
And the contents of the article seems to be him asking questions.
A mock interview with these people, him giving
asking questions, yes, and then making up his own responses.
All right, he's totally lost his mind.
He's doing a solo campaign Dungeons and Dragons where he role plays what he thinks these different world leaders are like. I mean, that's probably the coolest thing he's ever done.
Just LARPing.
Yeah.
As an op-ed writer.
That would be providing less harm to society than what he usually does. So does Lyndon Johnson just like show his dick to Xi Jinping and say like, take a look at this? Like what do they have like a meaningful contribution to one another's discussion?
No, I think he's saying he's doing a solo interview with each of them.
Oh, like in turn.
Yeah, it's not like a round table.
It's not even that creative or interesting. Yes, he just like talks to each of them once separately.
Yeah.
He's gone full insane. Get this man some help.
But did he ask him if he would cover the debt of COVID?
No.
And whether they teach his thought in public schools.
Yeah, opportunity lost. Really.
All right, let me just read one. Since you brought Johnson, let me just read one small bit. So, from Friedman's perspective, President Johnson, what did you think of Joe Biden's speech about quitting Afghanistan? Johnson,
he's still alive for this now, though. He's like he never dies.
He's been sitting in the wings watching.
Yeah, he's Lenin's wax figure, like watching from the sidelines.
Oh my God,
it goes so Christmas past.
And I kind of like LBJ.
Yeah,
Johnson says, I listened to it being Biden's speech, and I have to say that I choked up. If only I had the guts to give that speech on April 7th, 1965.
I'm a pussy.
My God.
Oh my. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Holy shit.
Number one emotion Joe Biden speeches make you feel.
Regret.
Definitely not on the verge of crying.
And number one emotion that Lyndon Johnson was known for, contrition and apology.
Yeah, exactly. Not like whipping his giant dog out.
And just like browbeating and screaming and abusing them into compliance with what he wanted.
It's like Ron Jeremying all over people.
Holy shit. This is like, he's like shipping Johnson and Biden. Right? He's doing fanfic.
Yeah, this is political fanfic. Folks, we've gotten there.
He's doing slash fiction between two of America's oldest, whitest presidents who don't give a shit.
This is how this man makes a very comfortable living for himself.
Yeah. No one else could do it. No one else could think of this kind of shit.
You gotta respect the hustle.
Yeah.
All right. At risk of giving everyone whiplash, I'm just gonna completely change topics because we've talked too much about Afghanistan.
Yeah, please.
We talked too much about Thomas Friedman.
So this is my last one of the day. This is from CNET Tech. It is virtual Mark Zuckerberg showed me Facebook's new VR workplace. And so the picture accompanying it is apparently a bunch of employees sitting around a virtual conference table to hold their normal daily meeting.
They're not even allowed to just zoom in now. Now they have to do it using Facebook's VR proprietary bullshit.
It would seem that is what is being proposed. Yes.
Quit on the jobs. Quit on the spot. Everyone at Facebook, if any of you are listening, walk out. Strike. Leave. Get away from this hellscape. You're gonna be trapped in VR. What do they call it? If you don't go to hell, you don't go to heaven.
Purgatory.
Yeah, you're gonna be stuck in VR purgatory when your mind is burned out of your skull by Mark Zuckerberg and his scientists. Get the fuck out. Run away.
If anyone's ever watched or played the video game Soma, this is
Yeah.
what we're approaching. Where we are trapped in perpetual layers of are we even alive, or are we just stuck in a simulation with Mark Zuckerberg?
Or am I coding for Zuck?
Or are we just getting the suck, basically?
God damn it.
I
This sucks. This
Yeah.
sucks real bad.
know
Yeah.
we're really upset about like sanctions and murder and genocide and war, but like I can't believe you've done this.
Yeah, and so there are three things. One, what we've already talked about, that just on its face, having to go to meetings this way is kind of dystopian.
It's criminal.
Second is
They're in their contracts that say you have to titillate Zuckerberg's VR fantasies.
this is like being pushed by Zuckerberg as something that he wants to sell.
How is he not cashed out yet?
He has a real passion for the game. He loves this shit. He loves making people's
God damn it.
life definitively worse.
While he cooks like 8,000 steaks at once
Yeah.
on his giant 3 burners.
You get,
Holy Christ.
World's most robotic, inhuman man, made literally robotic and inhuman.
I mean, look, Facebook's been flirting with this shit for years now. But like, now they're forcing it on the employees. Oh my god.
yeah. Well, the other thing is that like VR chat already exists and is a very popular.
Yeah, but it would be great if like his workers all came in like Ugandan knuckles and made fun of him. But it's not going to be that. It's all going to be these horrible like emojified versions of themselves that they have to give away their name, license, their name, likeness, and recognition rights to. And oh god, he's just going to create a VR army. It's going to be like iRobot.
I do understand that Facebook has largely shifted from being like college kids trying to fuck to, QAnon moms talking about the newest mole rat children problem.
Mhm.
But can you think of a social network less suited to things you want your coworkers to know about than what goes on Facebook, or your boss to know about than what goes on Facebook? Like right now, if you're on Facebook, chances are you're posting deeply offensive, racist political memes, photos of you like topless or drunk, timeline shit where people are like trying to have affairs with you, or like everything on Facebook is inappropriate for the workplace, almost by definition, because that's the whole point. Because it's a social network for fucking around and doing dumb bullshit. Why would you integrate that into a workplace? In any they may as well have like Ashley Madison had workplace VR headsets.
Alex, these companies exist. I mean, even companies that provide services that, as you say, like kind of illicit in nature, they have corporate structures.
Pornhub launches new commuter rail.
There is a headquarters.
What is this?
There is a headquarters and a call center where people work at Pornhub, and their working rights matter.
Yeah, for porn.
Well, did you see that? Like, at least a couple of years ago, Pornhub like funded a bunch of snow plows to help plow cities.
Yeah, but that was kind of why I thought of it. But like, this is just not the right venue for this company. Like, this is monopolies are bad for a lot of reasons, but one of the most grotesque to me is that you have these blending of fields which should absolutely not be blended. And it's just a reminder that like Facebook exists to collect your data and to repackage it and resell it, and finding any way to monetize is their whole thing, because it's this huge bloated company with questionable profit methods. So I don't know. This is just a very, very dumb fusion of ideas, and that not only was already done, it was already done better.
Yeah, exactly. This is besides the issues of Facebook itself, of monopolies, it also is just like a very dismal perspective on the much lauded American innovation and capitalist innovation to create something that has already been created and make it worse.
Yeah, that's bad.
Yeah, de-inventing the wheel.
Exactly. What if we made the wheel more square?
Yeah.
So I said that this is my last one, but I think I'll add one more that we don't and probably shouldn't talk about, but will hopefully instill some hope in everyone's heart.
Shall not be discussed.
This is from NPR. How a beloved giant rat won free speech rights.
Oh, please, can we? Please, sir. I'd like to talk about the VR, the giant rat.
Is this like a storm vermin? Like, is this a giant sentient rat from some sort of fantasy fiction, or are we talking a real article?
It would appear to be a giant inflatable rat.
Oh, come on.
Deeply disappointing.
All right, folks.
Man,
We'll see you next
I
time.
want to talk about the rat.
Go ahead. The floor's all yours.
No, I'll just read the article. Whatever.
Well, if you listener want to give free speech rights to a giant inflatable rat as we watch them get stripped away from the rest of us, make sure you support articles like this, because they're the good ones. They're the gems in between the Saigon-like fall of a already fucked situation.
Support your local crank.
Crank articles about a guy who wants to masturbate while looking at LBJ. Like, in between those, there's the rat articles, and I think really, our hearts grow a few sizes each time we get one of them.
It's called All Things Considered for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, that was definitely my angriest episode. And we already covered drone strikes. So we will see you next time, listener, for something hopefully a little funnier. Good luck.
Not if I'm involved.
All right. Goodbye.
Hey, thanks for listening to the show. If you enjoy what we do here at the Non-Essential Workers Podcast and you want to support us, please check us out at patreon.com/non-essential-workers-podcast or by clicking the link below.
For $5, you get access to the Patreon feed and twice as many total episodes.
How many more?
I'll say it one more time for the back. Twice. Anyways, thanks and see you next time.